Hi, I'm Smári and this is my video about the draw in chess. As you probably know, draw is one of the three possible results of a chess game, but I want to show you all the different ways a game can end in a draw, which positions are drawn, and also how to use tactics to save positions that seem lost. We'll start with a presentation and then see game positions. There are many ways a game can end in a draw, and we'll now briefly go over each one before we go to the game positions. So the first one is kind of obvious. You offer a draw, your opponent accepts, and the game ends in a draw. The next one is called insufficient material, and that's when you cannot possibly checkmate your opponent or vice versa because there is simply not enough material on the board. And so here I have examples of this. If there are only the kings left, nobody can win. Also king and bishop versus king, or king and knight versus king. We will see some examples later in the video where there will be more pieces on the board, and we'll see examples of how it is not a draw. Then there's the stalemate. So stalemate is if the side to move doesn't have a legal move and the king is not in check. You just can't make a move and you're not in check. It's your move, it's stalemate. And we'll also look at some nice tactics with stalemate, notably furious piece, also called desperado, and self-stalemate. So check out for that later in the video. Threefold repetition means that the same position with the same possibilities arises 3 times in the game, and it does not have to be 3 moves in a row. The same possibilities means that en passant and castling rights must be the same in all 3 cases. There are some differences between over-the-board play and internet play in this regard, mainly that if you are playing on the internet, then the website that you're playing on will usually just stop the game immediately and declare the game a draw if the same position comes up 3 times. Whereas if you're playing in an actual tournament, then you will have to claim the draw yourself. And then there's the 50 move rule, which says that no pawns have been moved and no pieces have been captured for the last 50 moves. If this happens in an over-the-board game, in a tournament game, then you can claim a draw when this happens. Finally, there are 2 less known rules which come here. So the 75 move rule is very similar to the 50 move rule, except here it doesn't have to be the last 75 moves. It can be just any 75 moves in the game, and also the arbiter doesn't have to wait for the players to claim the draw. He can, if he wishes, stop the game and declare it a draw. And the 5-fold repetition is very similar to the 3-fold repetition, and the difference is very similar to the difference between the 50 and 75 move rules, in that the arbiter can stop the game if he wishes, and he sees that it's been a 5-fold repetition. Now let's see an example of insufficient material from an actual game. I was white in this position, and luckily for me I had the move king d7, attacking both black pieces. The game went knight b6 check and king takes e7, and the game was immediately drawn. Had black moved the bishop, I would have of course taken the knight, and then the same thing would have happened. The game would have been immediately drawn because checkmate is impossible. So this is an example of insufficient material. So if you have just the king left and your opponent just has a minor piece and nothing else, then you cannot lose the game because your opponent cannot checkmate you by any means. However, if you also have a minor piece, then you can lose the game because checkmate is possible. And if you run out of time in this position, then you will lose the game. And so I'm going to show you just a couple of positions like this where checkmate is possible, and therefore you have to not run out of time because then you will lose in an over-the-board game. So here, for example, if black plays the move bishop g8, then bishop b2 is checkmate. So therefore, in this position, black must avoid running out of time. Of course, holding the position with plenty of time is very easy. You just make any move except bishop g8 and then you're fine. Here's another example. With black to move, he can lose the game if he runs out of time, because checkmate is possible. With bishop g8, knight g6, it is checkmate. So therefore, black should just make a move like king g8, and if white takes the bishop, then the game ends in a draw immediately. Here's another example. With black to move, he can still lose the game with knight g8, because bishop g7 then mates. With knight versus knight, you can still lose the game. If you played knight g8 in this position, then white can reply with a move knight f7 checkmate. Which is why if your time runs out in this position, you will get a loss in a serious over-the-board tournament. On the internet, I think it varies a little bit between websites. So if you know anything about it, how it is on the website that you play, feel free to comment in the comment section below. Do you get a loss or do you get a draw in this position? I was black in this position in an internet game and my time was running out. So what should I do? I did the best move, which was to give up my rook for just a pawn, because after king takes my rook, then the game is an immediate draw. And also, even if my opponent doesn't take, if he moves the king somewhere else, then I also cannot lose the game anymore. So had I not done this, I would have lost the game on time because of that pawn that white had. So that's a really useful thing to remember when you're running out of time. Take your opponent's last pieces apart from the king, and then you cannot lose the game anymore. Stalemate draws the game, and therefore white in this position has a very nice way to achieve his draw. So he's down 2 pawns and black wants to promote the e-pawn, and white has a really nice move to avoid all of this from happening with the move queen h3 check. And black of course has to accept this, because if he moves the king, then it is of course white who's winning after he takes the black queen. So black has to take the white queen, but now white is not in check and he has no moves. So that's what we call stalemate. So this was a very nice way for white to get a draw in the position. And now one of my favorite puzzles of all time. It is white to move and draw, and as you can see, black has an a pawn that is about to queen, and white has no way of stopping it. So white has more pawns, but the black pawn is just much more dangerous than any of the white pawns. So how can white possibly save himself? Well, what he does is called self-stalemate. So with the move king g3, black goes and gets his queen. White plays king h4, a2, and then the move g3. So now whatever black does, including getting a queen, white has managed to stalemate himself, so to speak. It is white's move, but he cannot move anything and he's not in check, so he gets a draw. It's a very nice way to draw the game. All right, let's move over to a game that I played on the internet. I was black in this position, and so I'm down a lot of material, and if I had taken the rook on d7, I would have lost the game because I'm just down too much material. But instead I can get a draw with so-called perpetual check. So what I do is I just take the pawn on g3, and then white's only option is king h1, and now I just keep checking on the same squares, queen h3, king g1, queen g3, and so forth. So this is called a perpetual check, and it will result in a threefold repetition, and then the game is just drawn. So that's a really good way to get a draw as well when you're down on material. Try to get a perpetual check. And then our final example is the furious piece, which is a really nice trick to know as well. So here white only has a rook against the queen, and his king is cornered, but that is actually a good thing, because now white plays the move rook c7 check. The idea is that if black takes this rook with either king or queen, then in both cases it is stalemate. So then white gets a draw because he's not in check and he cannot make a move, so therefore stalemate. So black doesn't want this, he wants to win the game with his queen. So he plays the move king d8, but then the rook just follows the king and says, take me, take me. And black doesn't want to take, because whenever he takes, it is always going to be stalemate. So he tries to run away, but he cannot run away. So he runs away, and the rook just keeps coming after that king, saying, take me, take me. And poor black, he just cannot run away far enough. Wherever he goes, the rook follows, and black eventually will have to make the choice: do I take, and then it is stalemate, or if he goes back, then eventually it'll be a threefold repetition. So there you have it. That's my video and lesson about the draw. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.